Hi there, I'm Mike from the Comic Book Trove. Welcome to my channel and to my first video. This will hopefully be the first of many in a new series where I'm just going to be looking at different collected editions, giving my opinions on them, my thoughts, insight, if I have any to offer. And I just want to really just discuss them and share my thoughts really about them. And I thought I'd kick things off today with The Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1 by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. It's a seminal run on the character, one of the most significant runs and popular characters in all of comic book history. So let's get to the book itself then. Looking on the back cover, you get the classic cover gallery that the majority of Marvel Omnibus tend to have. We see the images of all the issues contained within, and you can see this contains Amazing Fantasy 15, obviously Spider-Man's first appearance there, and then Amazing Spider-Man issues 1 through 38, Annuals 1 and 2, Strange Tales Annual 2, and the Fantastic Four Annual 1. So you get a lot of content in here. It's definitely quite a big book and a great one to have because you get all of Steve Ditko's contribution to the series in here. Literally everything that he did on Spider-Man is contained in here, from the first appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15 right up till Ditko abruptly left the series and left Marvel in 1966. So yeah, really great to have it all in this one book, and for that reason alone, I think it's a must-have for any Spider-Man fan, for any Marvel fan, pretty much any comic book fan, unless you really don't like Spider-Man. But who doesn't really like Spider-Man, you know? So yeah, straight away here, Amazing Fantasy 15. Just probably the best origin story for any comic book character. It still reads today as a genuinely great story. Ditko has got to be one of the best visual storytellers that there's ever been in the industry. The way his artwork tells a story sequentially from panel to panel is just expertly done. Not to take anything away from Stan Lee's writing, although he's not the best writer there's ever been, he's certainly had a way with words and a way of characterizing all of these newly created then characters, such as Spider-Man obviously in this case, but really everybody. He gave them all that iconic voice, and yeah, it's just a joy to read through this. It really is. Obviously it's dated, you know, you're talking about comics that are coming up on 60 years old now, so a lot of the dialogue can be a little bit tough to get your head around. There's a lot of references that are very out of date, but fundamentally it's all still very enjoyable to read. And one of, if not the key selling point for me of these omnibus collections is the fact that you can collect so many historic runs in this great oversized format with beautiful restored artwork. Hopefully you'll see, if you're new to collecting omnibus, so if you've never had any of them before, hopefully you get an idea as I flick through here of just how well the artwork has been restored from the original files. Because if you managed to get an original copy of, say, Amazing Spider-Man number 1, as we're looking through here, there's frankly no way the art would look anywhere near as good as this. So the colour restoration and just the art restoration in general is absolutely phenomenal, and the fact that you can collect this kind of historical content in this kind of format, looking as good as it does here, is, like I say, for me, it's the key selling point. It allows you to put these full runs together that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get, almost definitely, unless you've got a lot of money to spend and a lot of time to spend just tracking down these old issues, which if you do, fair enough, because that's, you know, great for you if you can do that. But for many of us, I think this is a much more feasible option and a great way to actually read some of these comics. Because that's the thing, even if you manage to get a copy of these old issues, you'd presumably get them slabbed and graded. You wouldn't actually open them and read through them because that would be crazy. Yeah, so as we look through here, you start to see from the very beginning a lot of key first appearances. You get the Sandman here. And it's just, even as I read through this, part of me just wants to start reading the issue, even though I've probably read through these 3 or 4 times already. But yeah, throughout this run you get first appearances by the Vulture, the Lizard, Sandman, Green Goblin, the Scorpion, and the Sinister Six appear for the first time. Kraven the Hunter. It's crazy really how many great characters first appeared during these early years. Speaking of the Lizard, there you go. Yeah, just really, it's tough to find words to describe it really. It's just one of those runs that I think it's so fundamental to the character. It's just one of those things I think everyone who's got any interest in reading Spider-Man comics owes it to themselves to read this at some point, because not only has it got an incredible amount of historical significance, but it still, as I say, it still holds up as good material to just actually read and enjoy. These guys, I spoke a lot about key first appearances of great villains, the Green Goblin, the Lizard, Mysterio, etc. But yeah, I've got to acknowledge that there are also some very forgettable villains coming in here. For every hit, there's also a miss now and then, and these ones, the Enforcers, definitely not characters that I think stick in anybody's memory. They're just these, well, yeah, it's just these guys. You got a cowboy type guy, a big, strong guy, and a little, I can't remember what that guy does. I think he's good at judo or something. But yeah, just nothing stands out about them that makes them memorable. And you get a couple of other villains like that in here, but at the end of the day, we're talking about Silver Age comics here, and there was a lot of silliness that saw appear. First appearance of Kraven the Hunter there, issue 15. And yeah, just a lot of great stories in here. I don't want to spoil too much. I don't want to go through it issue by issue, because I do think that these should be read by anybody who hasn't read it yet, to experience it for the first time. Not that you're going to be massively surprised by the stories. It's not something that's necessarily going to catch you out and you're going to learn something you didn't probably already know if you've read any Spider-Man stories since, because I think everything in some way references back to this original material. But I do just want to showcase this real quick. So this is Spider-Man Annual 1, and the first appearance of the Sinister Six. And what I really like about this is not necessarily the Sinister Six themselves, which is a pretty cool team, admittedly, just different Spider-Man villains working together. But what I really like about this annual is that basically Spider-Man ends up taking each member of the Six, takes them on one at a time, because they have the worst plan ever, and decide that despite the fact there's 6 of them, and they could therefore massively outnumber Spider-Man if they just all jumped him at the same time, for some reason they decide they're going to split up and take him on one at a time and make him run through a kind of gauntlet of facing them one after the other, which is an absolute stupid plan, but whatever. It does allow Steve Ditko to do these incredible splash pages of each villain that basically serves as the climax of each battle. So here you see Spider-Man and Electro, he takes him down. You see another one here with Kraven, and it happens for each member of the team, if I remember rightly. So yeah, there we go again with Mysterio, Sandman, and you get the idea. But I just think it's really cool. Really showcases Ditko's artistic talent, because a lot of the time, Vulture, a lot of the time he would split, as most artists did, split the page into several just standard box panels here, like you see. Splash pages were not that common in Silver Age comics. So to see a few examples here in one particular issue, or one annual, is really quite unusual for the time, and really good to see. You also get the extras, so the original annuals included these kinds of extras where you see a bit of information on the villains that Spider-Man had fought up to that point, kind of just explaining who they were. You got the Vulture, the Tinkerer, Doc Ock, Sandman. Really cool little bonus features to throw in there, because you could easily imagine them having put together and just skipped this kind of stuff, but the fact that it's all in there just makes it that much more of an authentic experience to go through this and read it as though you had all the original issues and were just reading them back to back. But as I said before, with that incredibly well done restored artwork that makes reading through it that much more pleasurable. Classic image here, Steve Ditko self-portrait. Steve Ditko, of course, famously a guy who shied away from the camera, shied away from fame. I think only about 3 or 4 known photos of him even exist. That's the kind of level of isolation that we're talking about with Steve Ditko. So he's not a guy that you ever really heard much from, either during this time or for the rest of his life post Spider-Man, post Marvel. It was like getting blood out of stone trying to contact Steve Ditko for anything, which is a shame, because it would have been great for him to, I think, willingly interact a little bit more with the comic book community and with his fans, because he definitely had his fans. I mean, you know, the stuff you see here is just so well done. And I wasn't a huge Ditko fan until I actually took the time to read through these comics and experiencing them for myself, because I remember the first time I ever saw these issues, I was only really used to reading modern comics from modern age. So this obviously looked incredibly dated to me when you've got that kind of comparison. And I just kind of initially dismissed it. I was like, oh, old comics, don't know about that. I don't think I could enjoy that. Just looks too old. And then I actually said, you know what, I need to give it a chance, because we're talking about the origins of one of my favourite characters, and even if I don't like it, I'm going to have to try and read it and see what I think. And wow, was my mind changed. In fact, I think as a result of reading this particular book a few years ago, that changed my outlook completely on Silver Age comics and Bronze Age comics. Comics that I would have previously said up to that point were just too old for me to enjoy. And I think a lot of people have that viewpoint. But if you do find that you don't feel any attraction to older comics, if they don't appeal to you, you just think they look too dated, as much as I understand that initial impression, I do really think that you owe it to yourself to try reading at least some of the more significant runs, more popular, well-known runs like this, just to see if you actually would enjoy it, because you may well find that you like it a lot more than you thought you would. And if you don't, and you just think, yeah, no, I was right, that's too old for me, then fair enough. But at the end of the day, I don't claim that this is going to be enjoyable for everyone. But certainly I think if you go into it with an open mind, understanding that these are comics from the 60s, and they're not going to be written or drawn in the same way that modern comics are and have been for a while, then I certainly think there's a lot to enjoy right here, actually. I'm glad I landed on this issue 20 with the first appearance of the Scorpion. This is a great comic because Spider-Man basically gets his ass kicked, I think twice, fighting the Scorpion before he finally manages to overcome him. And it's just a great kind of classic story of a hero going up against a seemingly superior foe and having to use some cunning to take him out in the end, rather than just overpowering him. Although, I mean, to be fair, the Spider-Man does that quite a lot, but you don't often see him get outright beaten twice in the same issue by the same guy before he manages to defeat him. At least I'm pretty sure that's how it goes down. It's been a while since I read it, but I'm sure that's the case. So, working through the run now, issue 22. There comes a point not long after this where not only is Ditko credited as being the artist or the illustrator, but he starts to be officially credited as the plotter of these comics, which was fair because these comics made particularly heavy use of the Marvel method of putting together comics, which, for those who don't know, was basically, the concept of it was that Stan Lee would come up with an idea for a story. So he would say something like, so in this issue we want to see Spider-Man fight against Electro, or something pretty basic like that. I mean, he'd probably give a few more details, but that was the gist. And he'd give that to Steve Ditko as a general outline of what the story should be. And then Ditko or Jack Kirby or whoever the artist was on that particular comic would go away with that basic premise and draw up 22 pages of full story. which would then be returned to Stan Lee, and he would fill in the dialogue and the narration, etc. But what that basically meant was that the artist had a lot of freedom to put together a story as they saw fit, really. So they knew who the villain would probably have to be, and maybe a few other key details, but for the most part it was up to them how they presented that story. And I think more so than any other artist, Ditko took a particularly large amount of control of the creative process when it came to storytelling. And he demanded, I think, pretty much, and rightly so, probably many would say, to be credited for his contributions to the plots. So didn't just want to just be recorded as being the artist, but he wanted that credit for actually plotting the stories as well. And he eventually did get that credit, although potentially quite begrudgingly. I don't know. I think there was some reports that Stan wasn't necessarily too happy about the fact that he had to do that. But I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. You hear these sorts of things all the time about who did more work on what comic. Was it Stan Lee? Was it Jack Kirby? Did Stan Lee really do much at all? I don't try and get into it too much, because at the end of the day, I wasn't there, and most of the people having these conversations obviously weren't either, so it's not for me to say. But anyway, you can see here, he does start to get credited as the plotter. What issue is this? Issue 26. I think that's around about the first issue where he started to get that plotting credit. In fact, I just want to flick back a little bit and just show off something, because I think I've just bypassed, yeah, there we go, a key moment. Technically, this panel right here is the first appearance of Mary Jane Watson, but as a bit of the butt of a joke, she is blocked out by a flower, and we only see the reaction of what a couple of other characters think as they see her. So we know through other characters that Mary Jane is apparently a very beautiful character, but it will be a while yet. And we see her there walking away, again face hidden. Quite a nice little visual gag for Ditko to cleverly show her without showing her. And obviously she wouldn't make her first full appearance until issue 42, I believe, where John Romita famously revealed her. But just a little fun fact, I think, that technically Ditko was the first artist to draw her, even if it is a pretty strong technicality there. Yeah, and then we get towards probably the single most important 3 issues of this whole run. If you're familiar with this run, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about, or what I'm getting at. If you're not, then again, I won't spoil anything particularly, but let's see if I can find it. A little bit there. We're talking about issues, so close, issue 31 to 33, which I think we're about to hit just after this. Yep, starting here. So issue 31, If This Be My Destiny, starts a 3-issue arc, which again was unusual, because even though nowadays it goes without saying that any story in any comic book is probably going to run through at least 5 or 6 issues, if not more, to tell a longer ongoing story. Back and these days, it was uncommon for a story to even run across 2 issues. Most were just one and done issues. So this, being a 3-issue storyline, is particularly unusual for the time. But again, another example of how this run kind of broke the mold at the time, and just wasn't afraid to try new things, which Marvel kind of did throughout the 60s, really, a little bit slowly, but you know, slowly but surely they started to experiment with different methods of storytelling, different artwork styles, etc. Here you get the first appearance of Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy, which is where Peter has gone off to college at this point. I think it's his first day at college, and he ends up with, you know, bit of typical Peter Parker look. He ends up alienating everybody without having a clue that he's doing so because he's too busy worrying about his Aunt May. And I swear Aunt May spent almost the entire Silver Age history of Spider-Man on death's door. You've never seen an older and frailer woman than Peter's Aunt May. It's like a slight scare puts her at risk of death from some kind of shock, panic attack or something. I don't know. It's just every few issues it seems like there's a story during this time where there's a high chance that she might be dying, and Peter spends the whole issue worrying about her. I don't know. Maybe it's just me and I'm sounding harsh, but yeah, I don't know. She's just one of those characters that basically just had one aspect to her, one element to the character, which is that she's there for Peter to worry about somebody, so that he can't just have fun. He's always got to worry about his sickly old Aunt May. Just want to showcase probably the single most famous example of Steve Ditko's artwork, full stop, not just on Spider-Man, but probably ever. And that's this sequence of panels in issue 33 that show Spider-Man struggling to get out from this incredibly heavy machinery that's collapsed on him. And you see him struggle, try, fail, and then eventually, slowly but surely, we see him pulling it off into this grand splash page reveal of him managing to break free. What's great about this particular sequence of panels is that although it's absolutely full of dialogue, courtesy of Stan Lee, he didn't like leaving a panel empty, I'll tell you that, this would work just as well, if not better probably, without any of that dialogue, because all that he's really saying there, if you read any of it, he's saying aloud about how heavy this is and how difficult it is for him to lift it, and it's just kind of stating the obvious. You can see that. The images clearly show that this is a massive chunk of machinery on top of him, and that it's hard for him, even with all his strength, to get out from under it. So that moment here where he manages to do it is just one of those kind of great moments of achievement where you feel like jumping up and cheering the first time you go through it. In the context of the story as well, not just those particular pages, but in reading the full story and understanding why he's down there and what he wants to do when he gets out, and why it's so desperate that he gets out so quickly, then yeah, it's just a great piece of storytelling, visual storytelling again, by Ditko, one of the best of all time. And I've just got to say that if you haven't checked this run out, and it isn't obvious by now what my opinion is, then I do strongly recommend that you give it a chance, because it's one of my favourite runs. Without any doubt in my mind whatsoever, I can confidently say that this omnibus and this run of comics is one of my absolute favourites, and it takes pride of place on my shelf. And yeah, hopefully it always will. It's one I wouldn't ever want to be without it, now that I've had it and read it. It's a book I can go back to time again and enjoy it every single time. So yeah, that pretty much takes us through the book, and this is, I believe, out of print at the moment, which is obviously quite frustrating for anybody who is interested in it and would like to get a copy, but it's one of the most popular runs in Marvel history, and Marvel have, to be fair, become much better at reprinting their out of print material, especially when it's in something that's going to be consistently popular and in high demand as this run. So I do quite confidently believe that this will get another reprint sooner rather than later. In fact, next year will be the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man, so if not before, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it gets a reprint next year. In fact, I quite largely expect it will get a reprint. I'd be more surprised if it doesn't. But this is also, even before Marvel started reprinting books more frequently, this was already, I think, the most reprinted book in terms of omnibus editions that they have, because I bought this one a few years ago and it was already on a third printing then, and I know it's had a fourth printing since then. So yeah, it's one of those, I think it's going to come and go a lot more often than other editions, so even when it does happen to be out of print, I'm sure it won't be too long until there is another opportunity to get a copy. But anyway, If you've made it through all of this, thank you very much. And I just really want to emphasize again that this is a great book, well worth picking up, and I hope I've managed to convince you of its significance, of its importance, and maybe intrigued you into reading it if you haven't already read it. And if you have read it already, then maybe you want to dive back in and read it sooner than you otherwise expected. Okay, so those are my thoughts on the book. Hopefully you found it interesting, enjoyable to watch. Please feel free to leave any comments for me in the section below. This was my very first video, guys, so I realise it may not have been the best quality thing you've ever seen, but hopefully I will just keep focusing on that and improving as I go along and gain more experience at it. But if you did enjoy what I did today, then do feel free to like and subscribe to my videos, and hopefully I'll get something else out soon. Thank you very much.